The autumn sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Wilkins' MMA, casting long shadows across the worn mats. The gym wasn't much, just a converted warehouse on the edge of town with second-hand equipment and walls adorned with motivational quotes rather than championship belts. But to the dozen or so regulars who trained there, it was sacred ground. Chuck Wilkins moved between his students with quiet authority, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp and a body that, while no longer in its prime, still carried the disciplined strength of someone who respected physical limits but refused to surrender to them. A thin scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, the only visible hint of a past he never discussed. "Form before force, Danny," Chuck said, adjusting a young man's stance. "Your opponent will use your strength against you if you telegraph it." "Like that?" Danny nodded, sweat dripping from his brow. At 19, he was the youngest in the adult class, working night shifts at the local warehouse to afford these lessons. "Sorry, coach, I'll get it right. Don't apologize. Learn." Chuck's voice was firm but not unkind. Again. The door swung open, bringing a blast of cold air and the scent of expensive cologne. The regulars glanced over, then returned to their training, all except Chuck, who studied the newcomer with wary eyes. The man who walked in wore designer workout gear that had never seen a drop of sweat. Tall, with a perfectly maintained physique that spoke of personal trainers and protein. Shakes rather than discipline and grit, he surveyed the gym with barely disguised disdain. "I'm looking for the owner," he announced, not bothering to remove his sunglasses. Chuck stepped forward, wiping his hands on a towel. "That would be me, Chuck Wilkins." Derek Lansing. The man didn't offer his hand. "I just moved to the area, looking for somewhere to keep my edge." His eyes swept the space again. "This is quaint." Something hardened in Chuck's expression, but his voice remained level. "We're not fancy, but we're effective. First class is free if you want to try it out." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, why not? I've trained with some of the best in LA. Be interesting to see how you do things in..." He paused. "Places like this." As Derek sauntered toward the locker room, Maria, Chuck's assistant coach and the gym's only female instructor, appeared. At his side. "I've got a bad feeling about that one," she murmured. Chuck shrugged. "Everyone deserves a chance." "Yeah, but some people deserve it less than others," Maria replied with a grimace. "He reminds me of those Wall Street types who come to the gym to hunt for stories they can brag about at cocktail parties." "Then we'll give him a story worth telling," Chuck said, his face unreadable. What no one in the gym knew, what Chuck had spent 15 years ensuring no one knew, was that the simple life he'd built was constructed atop foundations far deeper and darker than anyone could imagine. The modest coaching business, the small apartment above the gym where he lived alone, the quiet routine he maintained, all of it was by careful design. Before this gym, before this town, Chuck Wilkins had been someone else entirely. The class resumed, and Derek joined them after changing, standing at the back with an air of amused condescension. Chuck led the group through basic combinations, watching Derek from the corner of his eye. The newcomer had some training. His stance was decent, his movements fluid, but there was a showiness to it, a performance quality that had no place in a real fight. "Pair up for sparring," Chuck announced after they finished drills. "Light contact only. This is about technique, not trying to take each other's heads off." Partners formed quickly, leaving Derek without an opponent. Chuck nodded to him. "You can work with me." Derek's smile widened. "Perfect. I was hoping to get some one-on-one time." With the master, they squared off on the mat. Chuck kept his guard relaxed but ready, studying Derek's movement. The younger man circled, throwing flashy jabs that were more about looking good than landing. "You military?" Derek asked suddenly, feinting with his right. Chuck didn't react to the feint. "What makes you ask?" "The haircut, the posture, the yes sir, no sir vibe you've got going on." "I served," Chuck said simply, countering a wild hook with a light tap to Derek's ribs, just enough to show the opening. "What branch?" "Let me guess." Derek threw a combination that Chuck easily slipped. "Marines, you got that jarhead intensity." Chuck remained silent, focusing on the session rather than the conversation. "No," Derek pressed, growing irritated at his inability to land a clean hit. "Army then?" "No, wait, don't tell me you were some kind of special forces badass?" A flicker crossed Chuck's face, so brief most would have missed it, but Derek caught it and grinned like a shark scenting blood. "Holy shit, I'm right, aren't I?" "What were you, Rangers? Green Beret?" "That's enough sparring for today," Chuck said, stepping back. "Good first session. Work on keeping your right up when you throw that cross." But Derek wasn't done. "Hey everyone," he called out loudly, causing the other pairs to stop and look over. "Did you know your coach here was Special Forces?" The gym went quiet. Chuck stood perfectly still, his face expressionless. "Coach never talks about that stuff," Danny said, uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "Of course he doesn't," Derek said with exaggerated understanding. "The quiet professional, right? Too humble to share war stories?" Maria stepped forward. "That's enough. Were you a SEAL?" Derek interrupted, staring directly at Chuck. "You've got that 1,000-yard stare they always talk about." Chuck met his gaze evenly. "Class dismissed for today. Good work, everyone." He turned and walked toward his office. Derek's voice followed him. "I knew a SEAL once. Real operator. Not the kind who comes back and teaches fitness classes in some rundown gym." Chuck paused, his back to the room. For a moment, no one breathed. "See you Thursday," Chuck said quietly to his students, then continued to his office, closing the door behind him. The students dispersed quickly. The mood soured. Derek lingered, looking pleased with himself as he gathered his things. Maria approached him, her voice low and controlled. "Don't come back," she said. Derek raised an eyebrow. "Because I asked a simple question. If he's ashamed of his service..." "Because you don't belong here," Maria cut him off. "This isn't a place for people looking to boost their ego or play tough guy. It's a community." "A community?" Derek laughed. "Is that what you call this collection of has-beens and never-will-bes?" Maria's eyes flashed. "Get out!" Derek held up his hands in mock surrender. "I'm going, but I'll be back. I paid for a month up front, remember? And I'm very interested in hearing more about your coach's credentials." As Derek left, Maria stood in the empty gym, a sense of foreboding settling over her. She'd been working with Chuck for 3 years, and while he never spoke about his past, she'd seen enough to know that whatever lay behind his careful silence was both honorable and painful. People like Derek lived to expose others' wounds, not to heal them, but to watch them bleed. Little did she know that Derek Lansing would return the next day, armed with more than just insulting questions. He would bring with him a storm that would force Chuck Wilkins to confront the very past he'd been running from, a past that, once revealed, would change everything. What was it about Chuck's previous life that he kept so carefully hidden? And how far would Derek go to expose it? Have you ever encountered someone who seemed determined to tear down others to build themselves up? What drives such behavior, and how would you respond to it? The next evening, Chuck arrived early to prepare for his beginner's class. The gym was his sanctuary, the place where the rigid disciplines that had once been tools of war now served to build rather than destroy. He was adjusting the heavy bag when the door opened, revealing Derek flanked by 2 equally polished-looking men. "Chuck, my new favorite coach," Derek called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Hope you don't mind. Brought some friends who were interested in your program." Chuck straightened, his face neutral. "Class doesn't start for another hour." "Oh, we're not here for class," Derek said, approaching with predatory confidence. "We're here for a story. Your story." One of Derek's companions pulled out a phone, videoing the interaction. The other leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with detached amusement. "I did some digging after yesterday," Derek continued. "Special operations community isn't that big, right? Started asking around about a Chuck Wilkins." A muscle twitched in Chuck's jaw, but he remained silent. "Funny thing is," Derek pressed on, "nobody seems to have heard of you. No Chuck Wilkins in any SEAL team records available to the public." "I never said I was a SEAL," Chuck replied quietly. Derek's smile widened. "No, you didn't, did you? Very clever. Let others assume, never claim. Isn't that how stolen valor usually works? The term hung in the air like a live grenade. Stolen valor, the act of falsely claiming military decorations or service, was among the most despicable offenses in Chuck's worldview. "I think you should leave," Chuck said, his voice dangerously calm. "Not before we clear this up," Derek insisted, gesturing to the friend with the phone. "We run a podcast about military imposters. Very popular. People hate frauds who profit off claiming military backgrounds they never earned." It was then that Chuck noticed the logo on the phone case, Stolen Valor Hunters, a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of followers that specialized in ambush-style confrontations with people they accused of faking military service. "This isn't going to go the way you think," Chuck warned. Derek ignored him, pulling out a sheet of paper. "I've got the Freedom of Information Act request results right here. No Charles or Chuck Wilkins matching your age served in naval special warfare in the last 20 years. Students began to filter in for the evening class, stopping uncertainly at the unfolding scene. "So which is it, coach?" Derek pressed, using air quotes. "Did you lie about being a SEAL, or did you lie about serving at all? Because our listeners would love to know how you justify charging these good people for training when your own background is fiction." The students murmured among themselves. Danny stepped forward. "Coach never said anything about being a SEAL. That was all you." "Then why didn't he correct me?" Derek challenged. "Interesting omission, isn't it?" Maria burst through the door, face flushed from running. "What the hell is going on here?" Derek turned to her with mock surprise. "Just having a friendly chat with your boss about his military credentials, or lack thereof." Chuck's voice cut through the tension. "Everyone who's here for class, head to the back room. Maria will start warm-ups." His tone left no room for argument. The students hesitated, then slowly complied, casting worried glances over their shoulders. Once they were gone, Chuck approached Derek, stopping just outside arm's reach. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" Derek sneered. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who's been misleading everyone. These people trust you, look up to you, and you've built that respect on a lie." "I've built it on my actions," Chuck replied. "Not stories, not claims, just what I do here every day." "Very philosophical," Derek mocked. "But it doesn't change the facts. You're not a SEAL. You probably never served a day in your life. You're just another fraud trading on the reputation of real heroes." Something dangerous flickered in Chuck's eyes. "Last chance. Walk out that door, delete whatever footage you have, and don't come back." Derek stepped closer, invading Chuck's space. "Or what? You'll show me those killer SEAL moves?" He laughed, looking to his friends. "That would make great content, actually. The fake SEAL losing his cool on camera." Chuck didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm not a SEAL," he said quietly. "I never claimed to be." "Finally, some honesty!" Derek exclaimed. "So what were you, Army cook, Air Force pencil pusher, or maybe just a civilian who watched too many war movies?" Chuck's voice remained steady. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Derek replied. "Exposing frauds like you is a public service. By this time tomorrow, your little gym will be empty, your reputation in tatters." The cameraman zoomed in on Chuck's face, capturing the subtle shifts of emotion that crossed it, not anger or fear, but something more complex. Like a man watching a bridge collapse that he knew was structurally unsound, but had hoped would hold. "Get out," Chuck said finally. "All of you." Derek shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. "We've got paid memberships, remember? You can't legally keep us out." Before Chuck could respond, the gym door burst open again. A tall, imposing man in his 50s, with close-cropped grey hair and the unmistakable bearing of military leadership, strode in. He wore civilian clothes, pressed khakis and a polo shirt, but carried himself with absolute authority. "What the hell is this circus?" the newcomer demanded, his voice a controlled thunderclap that made Derek and his friends flinch. Chuck straightened almost imperceptibly. "Commander Bradford, unexpected surprise." The newcomer, Commander Bradford, surveyed the scene with shrewd eyes, taking in the camera, Derek's aggressive stance, and Chuck's controlled tension. "These gentlemen were just leaving," Chuck added pointedly. Derek, momentarily thrown off balance by the new arrival, quickly recovered. "Actually, we're having an important conversation about your friend's military background, or lack thereof." Bradford's eyebrows raised as he turned to Derek. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir," Derek replied, automatically responding to Bradford's natural authority. "We run a channel dedicated to exposing stolen valor cases, and we have reason to believe Mr. Wilkins here has been misrepresenting his service." Bradford looked at Chuck, something unspoken passing between them. Then he turned back to Derek. "Son, do you know who I am?" Derek shrugged. "Another friend of his, I assume?" "Captain James Bradford, U.S. Navy, retired, former commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Derek blinked, uncertain for the first time. A SEAL commander was not someone to be trifled with, even a retired one. "With all due respect, sir," Derek pressed, regaining his composure. "Your friend here claims to have been a SEAL, but his name doesn't appear in any records we can access." "He never claimed that," Bradford corrected. "You did. And as for records," he chuckled, a sound without humor. "There are records, and then there are records." Derek's cameraman lowered his phone slightly, his enthusiasm visibly dampening. "What's that supposed to mean?" Derek demanded. "It means," Bradford said, stepping closer, "that some men's service is classified to a level you couldn't access with 1,000 FOIA requests. It means that some operations never officially happened, carried out by men who were never officially there." A tense silence fell. Chuck's face remained impassive, but something in his posture had changed. A subtle readiness, like a coiled spring. "So, you're saying he was what? Some kind of super-secret SEAL?" Derek scoffed, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Bradford smiled thinly. "I'm not saying anything about Chief Wilkins' service record. That's the point. The use of the military rank chief hung in the air, a quiet confirmation that raised more questions than it answered." Derek looked between the two men, sensing the ground shifting beneath his feet, but unwilling to retreat. "This is convenient. Your buddy shows up just in time to bail you out with some vague classified operations story." Chuck finally spoke. "Jim is here because he was already scheduled to be here. He's giving a talk to my advanced students about mental resilience under pressure, something he teaches now at Annapolis." "The Naval Academy," Derek's cameraman whispered. Bradford checked his watch. "Which I'm now late for thanks to this sideshow." He fixed Derek with a hard stare. "I suggest you take your little camera crew and leave before you embarrass yourselves." Any further? Derek hesitated, visibly calculating his options. The story was spinning away from his original narrative, but he wasn't ready to give up. "If you're really who you say you are, I don't need to prove myself to you," Bradford cut him off. "Neither does he." He nodded toward Chuck. "But if you're so concerned with stolen valor, perhaps you should focus on actual cases rather than harassing legitimate veterans running legitimate businesses." The implicit confirmation that Chuck was indeed a veteran, and one known personally to a high-ranking SEAL commander, was impossible to miss. Derek's jaw tightened. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "Yes," Chuck replied quietly. "It is. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Derek gestured to his friends, and they reluctantly headed for the door. Before leaving, Derek turned back. "I still don't believe either of you, and I'm going to prove it." After they left, Bradford turned to Chuck with a grim expression. "Trouble?" Chuck shrugged. "Nothing I can't handle." "You said that in Kandahar, too, right before everything went to hell." A ghost of a smile touched Chuck's lips. "And we got through it." "Not all of us," Bradford replied softly. The smile vanished. Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the weight of those words and the memories they carried. "Your students are waiting," Chuck said, changing the subject. Bradford studied his former subordinate. "How long are you going to hide out here, Chief?" "I'm not hiding," Chuck countered. "I'm living." "Same difference for men like us," Bradford said. "The world could still use your skills." "The world has had enough of my skills," Chuck replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "The ones I'm using now do less damage." Bradford didn't argue the point. "That loudmouth is going to be a problem." "I'll handle it," Chuck repeated. "Like you handled Santiago?" Bradford asked, referencing something from their shared past. Chuck's expression darkened. "That was different." "Was it?" Bradford challenged. "Another entitled hothead who didn't know when to back down, who threatened everything you'd built. Seems pretty similar from where I'm standing." "This isn't a war zone," Chuck said firmly. "And I'm not that man anymore." Bradford clapped him on the shoulder. "For your sake, I hope that's true. For his sake, too." He nodded toward the door where Derek had exited. As Bradford headed toward the back room to speak with the advanced class, Chuck remained alone in the main gym area, the weight of his past pressing down on him more heavily than any physical burden he'd ever carried. What had happened in Kandahar? Who was Santiago? And how far would Derek go to expose a truth he couldn't possibly understand? A truth that, if revealed, might destroy more than just Chuck's quiet life. When does persistence cross the line into harmful obsession? Have you ever witnessed someone so convinced of their righteousness that they couldn't see the damage they were causing? The following week brought an uneasy calm. Derek hadn't returned to the gym, but Chuck knew better than to believe the threat had passed. Men like Derek didn't retreat. They regrouped. His suspicions were confirmed when Danny burst into his office one afternoon, phone in hand, face pale with anger. "Coach, you need to see this." Chuck took the phone. On the screen was a YouTube video titled "Fake Seal Exposed, the Chuck Wilkins Fraud." The thumbnail showed Chuck's face with the word "liar" stamped across it. The view count was already over. 50,000. "Don't watch it," Danny urged. "It's all lies and edited clips from when they came here." But Chuck pressed play. Derek's voice narrated over spliced footage from their confrontation, carefully edited to remove Bradford's intervention and make it appear as if Chuck had been caught in deception. This so-called instructor claims to have a special forces background, but when pressed for details, he can provide none, Derek's voice intoned. Sources within the military community confirm no record of a Chuck Wilkins serving in any special operations capacity. Chuck handed the phone back, his expression unreadable. "Have the others seen this?" Danny nodded miserably. "It's all over. Social media. Some of the newer students are already asking for refunds." Chuck wasn't surprised. The martial arts community was tight-knit, and reputation was everything. Derek had struck at the foundation of his business with surgical precision. "What are you gonna do?" Danny asked. "Teach my classes," Chuck replied simply. Truth has a way of outlasting lies. But by evening, the damage was spreading. 2 more students requested refunds. A local news station called asking for comment on the allegations of stolen valor. Maria reported that negative reviews were flooding their online business listings. "You need to fight back," she insisted as they closed up for the night. "Make your own video, tell your side." Chuck shook his head. "Getting into a public mudslinging. Match won't help. Then let me call Bradford. He can set the record straight." "No," Chuck said firmly. "Jim has his own life. This is my problem." Maria studied him with frustration. Why won't you defend yourself? If even half of what Bradford implied is true— It doesn't matter what's true, Chuck interrupted. What matters is that I built this place so people could learn to defend themselves, gain confidence, become stronger. That work continues, regardless of what some internet crusader says about me. Before Maria could argue further, the gym door opened. They both turned, expecting another disgruntled student, but instead found a slender woman in her early 40s. Standing in the doorway, she had auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wore a simple blouse and jeans, but carried herself with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to crisis. "We're closed," Maria called out. The woman stepped inside anyway. "I'm looking for Chuck Wilkins." Chuck moved forward. "That's me." Something flashed in the woman's eyes, recognition tinged with uncertainty. "You don't remember me, do you?" Chuck studied her face. There was something vaguely familiar about her features, but he couldn't place her. "I'm sorry," he said. "Should I?" "Sarah Reeves," she replied. "Though it was Martinez when we met." The name hit Chuck like a physical blow. His carefully maintained composure slipped for just an instant, revealing a complex mix of shock, recognition, and something that might have been guilt. "Sarah," he repeated, the name clearly significant. "It's been 15 years," she finished for him, "since Kandahar." Maria looked between them, sensing the weight of history. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, retreating to the back office. Once they were alone, Sarah spoke again. "I saw the video, the one calling you a fraud." Chuck's jaw tightened. "It's nothing, internet nonsense." "It's not nothing when it threatens everything you've built," Sarah countered. "And it's not nothing when it's connected to my husband's death." The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Michael wouldn't want you to lose everything because of what happened," she continued. Chuck's voice was rough when he finally responded. "How did you find me?" "Bradford," she admitted. "We've stayed in touch over the years. He called me after that confrontation here, said you might need help." "I don't," Chuck said firmly. Sarah stepped closer. "The man behind that video, Derek Lansing, he's not just some random troublemaker. He's connected. Connected how? His uncle is Senator James Mercer." Chuck went very still. Senator Mercer, a powerful figure on the Senate Armed Services Committee, known for his hawkish views and unwavering support for military contractors. "That's not a coincidence," Chuck said slowly. Sarah shook her head. "Bradford doesn't think so either. Lansing may have stumbled onto you by accident, but once he started digging—" "Mercer would have recognized my name," Chuck finished. "The pieces falling into place. And pointed his nephew in my direction. The Santiago operation was officially buried," Sarah said, lowering her voice despite the empty gym. "But Mercer was on the oversight committee. He saw the classified reports." Chuck closed his eyes briefly. The past suddenly vivid and immediate. Santiago. The operation that had ended his career claimed the life of Sarah's husband, Michael, and exposed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of military contracting and possibly to lawmakers like Mercer. "Why now?" Chuck asked. "After all these years?" "Mercer's up for re-election. There are rumors he's positioning for a presidential run in 4 years. The last thing he needs is someone who knows what really happened in Santiago resurfacing in the public eye." "I'm not a threat to him," Chuck insisted. "I've kept my silence, built a new life. You're living proof that the official story was a lie." Sarah cut him off. "And with social media, viral videos, all it would take is one journalist connecting the dots. Mercer can't risk that." Chuck paced the length of the mat, processing the implications. "So, this isn't just about my gym. It's about silencing me. Permanently, or at least destroying my credibility so thoroughly that no one would believe anything I might say." Sarah nodded grimly. "Bradford thinks so. That's why he called me." "What did he expect you to do?" "Convince you to fight back," she said simply, "before it's too late." Chuck stopped pacing, turning to face her fully. I made a promise after Santiago. No more violence, no more warfare, even of the political kind. And Michael made a promise. Too, Sarah replied, her voice tight with emotion. To expose the truth, no matter the cost. It cost him his life, Chuck. Don't let it also cost you everything you've built. The tension between them was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from the back of the gym. Chuck reacted instantly, pushing Sarah behind him and moving toward the source of the noise with silent efficiency. They found Maria sprawled on the office floor, a bleeding gash on her temple. The window was shattered, and through it, Chuck could see figures in dark clothing moving quickly around the back of the building. "Maria!" Chuck knelt beside her. "What happened?" She groaned, regaining consciousness. "3 men broke in. I tried to stop them." She gestured weakly toward the open safe in the corner. "They took everything. Cash, client files, your personal documents." Sarah pulled out her phone, dialing 911, but Chuck placed a hand over hers, stopping her. "Wait," he said, his voice deadly calm. "This isn't a random robbery," as if confirming his suspicion. A message notification appeared on the gym's computer screen, an email from an anonymous sender. Chuck opened it to find a video attachment. When he pressed play, Derek Lansing's face filled the screen. "Hello, fraud," Derek's recorded image sneered. "By now you've discovered you've been robbed. Unfortunate, but that's just the beginning. I have your files, your client's personal information, everything. Unless you publicly admit that you fabricated your military background and close your gym permanently, I'll release all of this online, after editing it to make it look like you're running a scam operation that preys on vulnerable people." The video continued, Derek's threats becoming more specific, more vicious. He knew about Chuck's past, not the full truth, but enough fragments to be dangerous. And the implication was clear. This wasn't just about the gym anymore. It was about destroying Chuck completely. The video ended with Derek's smirking face. "You have 24 hours to post your confession and announce your closure. Otherwise, everything burns." Chuck closed the laptop, his expression transforming. It wasn't a rage that Sarah and Maria saw. It was something colder, more focused, a tactical assessment that had nothing to do with the mild-mannered coach and everything to do with the man he'd once been. "Call the police," Sarah urged. "Report the break-in, the theft, the blackmail, and tell them what?" Chuck countered. "That I'm being targeted because of a classified operation that officially never happened? That a senator's nephew is trying to silence me about war crimes that were covered up 15 years ago? Then what are you going to do?" Maria asked, holding a towel to her bleeding temple. Chuck was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks with the precision of someone trained to make life-or-death decisions under the worst possible conditions. "I'm going to end this," he said finally, "but not the way they expect." He helped Maria to a chair, checking her wound with expert hands. "You need stitches. Sarah, can you take her to the emergency room?" Sarah nodded, understanding that Chuck needed them, safely away from whatever he was planning. "What about you?" she asked. "I need to make a phone call," Chuck replied, "and then I'm going to pay Derek Lansing a visit." "Chuck," Sarah said, her voice tinged with concern. "Whatever you're thinking, I won't break my promise," he assured her, though his eyes had taken on a dangerous intensity. "But there are other ways to fight." As Sarah helped Maria toward the door, Chuck pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Bradford, it's Wilkins. I need the Santiago files." Pause. "You're sure? They came after my people, Jim. They crossed the line." "Understood. No further explanation needed. I'll have them within the hour. What else?" Chuck's voice was calm, measured, certain. "Find out where Derek Lansing lives and call the team. All of them. Even Ramirez. Especially Ramirez. Tell him to bring his camera." Bradford chuckled darkly. "So that's how you're playing it. "The only way I can," Chuck replied. "They want a story? I'll give them one they'll never forget." As he ended the call, Chuck moved to a seemingly ordinary section of wall behind the reception desk. He pressed his palm against it in a specific pattern, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small safe, one the robbers hadn't known to. Look for inside was a worn leather case. Chuck removed it carefully, opening it to reveal not weapons, but documents, flash drives, and photographs. The true record of what had happened in Santiago, the evidence he'd kept safe all these years. Not for revenge, but for justice, should it ever be necessary. Tonight it had become necessary. The quiet MMA coach was gone. In his place stood the man he'd once been, the man whose name had been erased from official records, not to hide his disgrace, but to protect his true accomplishments from those who would exploit or destroy them. What had really happened in Santiago? What connection did Senator Mercer have to the operation that had claimed Michael Martinez's life? And how would Chuck use the truth to fight back against Derek's campaign of destruction? When does a moment come in life when you must set aside who you've become to embrace who you once were? Is there ever a time when the peaceful path must give way to necessary confrontation? The sleek, high-rise apartment building where Derek Lansing lived spoke of old money and privilege. Chuck stood across the street, observing the security measures, doorman, keycard access, cameras, with the practiced eye of someone who had infiltrated far more heavily guarded facilities. But tonight, he wouldn't need those skills. Tonight was about a different kind of operation. His phone vibrated, a text from Bradford. "Team in position, package delivered." Chuck checked his watch. 3 hours since the break-in at his gym. 3 hours in which Derek Lansing had likely been celebrating his victory, unaware that he had awakened something far more dangerous than a simple MMA coach. Chuck crossed the street, a small duffel, a bag slung over his shoulder. The doorman straightened as he approached. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Derek Lansing," Chuck replied calmly. The doorman's expression shifted slightly. Recognition. "Mr. Lansing mentioned you might stop by, said to send you right up." He smirked, clearly expecting Chuck was walking into trouble. Chuck nodded his thanks and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he allowed himself a grim smile. Derek's arrogance was making this almost too easy. When he reached Derek's floor, Chuck found the apartment door slightly ajar, an invitation, or more likely, a trap. He pushed it open slowly, revealing a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Derek sat in an expensive leather armchair, a self-satisfied smile on his face. His 2 friends from the gym stood nearby, one still. "Holding a camera. The fraud arrives," Derek announced theatrically. "Right on cue." Chuck stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You have something that belongs to me." Derek gestured lazily to a stack of files on the coffee table. "Your precious client records, the cash from your safe. Consider them a down payment on your confession." "That's not what I came for," Chuck replied, setting his duffel bag down. "No?" Derek raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here? To rough me up? Try to scare me?" He laughed. "That would make great content for my channel. Fake SEAL assaults innocent whistleblower." The cameraman raised his device, ready to capture whatever happened next. "I'm here to tell you a story," Chuck said quietly. "The real story." Derek's smile faltered slightly. "We're not interested in your lies." "Not my story," Chuck clarified. "Santiago, Operation Blackfish, your uncle Senator Mercer, the $17 million that disappeared. The 3 American soldiers who died for that money." The color drained from Derek's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Chuck countered. "I think that's why you targeted me specifically. Not because you stumbled across a possible stolen valor case, but because your uncle recognized my name when you mentioned it and sent you to silence me." Derek's friends exchanged confused glances, clearly not privy to this additional agenda. "What is he talking about, Derek?" the cameraman asked. "Nothing," Derek snapped. "He's desperate, making up conspiracy theories to save his reputation." Chuck opened his duffel bag and removed a laptop. "Then you won't mind if I share some evidence with your audience?" He nodded toward the camera. "Isn't that what your channel is all about? Exposing the truth?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Derek's eyes. "What evidence?" "Everything," Chuck replied simply. "The classified mission files, the financial records tracing the missing funds to offshore accounts controlled by military contractors with ties to your uncle. The autopsy reports proving that 3 American soldiers, including Michael Martinez, weren't killed by enemy fire as officially claimed, but executed to silence them after they discovered the embezzlement scheme." Derek stood abruptly. "Turn that camera off," he ordered his friend. The cameraman hesitated, looking between Derek and Chuck. "Keep rolling," Chuck told him, "unless you want to be complicit in covering up war crimes and the murder of American soldiers." "He's lying," Derek insisted, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "He has nothing." Chuck opened the laptop and turned it toward them. On the screen was a video conference call with 4 faces visible: Bradford, Sarah, and 2 men Derek didn't recognize. "Meet the survivors of Operation Blackfish," Chuck said. "Commander James Bradford, our team leader; Sarah Martinez, intelligence analyst and widow of Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez; Miguel Ramirez, combat photographer who documented everything; and Thomas Wilson, military financial auditor who first uncovered the missing funds." Derek lunged for the laptop, but Chuck intercepted him with practiced ease, redirecting his momentum and sending him stumbling back into his chair without ever appearing to exert force. "Your uncle buried the truth," Chuck continued, his voice level. "Used his position on the oversight committee to classify the real mission details, altered reports, silenced witnesses. But he couldn't erase everything, or everyone." "What do you want?" Derek demanded, his bravado crumbling. "Money?" Chuck's expression hardened. "What I want is for you to stop, take down the video about me, return what you stole, walk away." "Or what?" Derek challenged, though his voice lacked conviction. "You'll go public with these accusations." "Not accusations. Facts." Chuck gestured to the laptop, where Bradford was holding up a thick file with "classified" stamped across it. "Facts that your uncle has spent 15 years burying. Facts that would end his political career and likely send him to prison." The cameraman had moved closer, capturing everything. Derek's other friend stood frozen, visibly uncomfortable with the turn events had taken. "Why should I believe any of this?" Derek asked, desperation creeping into his tone. "You don't have to," Chuck replied. "But the journalists at the Washington Post, New York Times, and 3 major television networks who received copies of these files an hour ago might. They're probably calling your uncle for comment as we speak." Derek's phone began to ring as Yvonne Q. He glanced at the screen, Uncle Jim, and the last of his composure shattered. "What have you done?" he whispered. "What I should have done years ago," Chuck answered. "The truth doesn't stay buried forever, Derek. I tried to live quietly, to honor the sacrifice of my fallen teammates by building something positive." "You couldn't leave it alone." Derek scrambled for his phone, answering with shaking hands. "Uncle Jim, there's a problem." His face paled as he listened to whatever was being said on the other end. After a moment, he looked up at Chuck. "He wants to talk to you." Chuck took the phone. "Senator Mercer, it's been a long time." The voice on the other end was controlled but strained. "Wilkins, this is a dangerous game you're playing." "It was never a game to me," Chuck replied. 3 good men died. Your contractors pulled the trigger, but you covered it up. You protected the money instead of the truth." "What do you want?" Mercer asked, echoing his nephew's question. "Justice," Chuck said simply, "but I'm willing to start with something smaller. Call off your nephew permanently. Make him understand that his crusade ends tonight." A long pause. "And if I do?" Then the evidence stays with me and my team for now. Insurance policy. You announce your retirement at the end of your term. Health. Reasons, family time, whatever story you prefer. And you use your remaining influence to establish a foundation for veterans suffering from PTSD and other combat-related trauma, funded with exactly $17 million. That's extortion, Mercer hissed. That's atonement, Chuck corrected. A fraction of what you owe, but it's a start. Another pause, longer this time. I need time to consider. You have until morning, Chuck cut him off. After that, everything goes public. No negotiations, no deals. He ended the call and handed the phone back to Derek, whose arrogance had been replaced by stunned disbelief. Your move, Chuck told him. Derek looked from Chuck to the camera, which was still recording, then to the laptop, where 4 witnesses waited silently. The magnitude of his miscalculation was finally dawning on him. I didn't know, he said weakly. About Santiago, about my uncle. I just thought you were a fraud. Easy target. You didn't want to know, Chuck corrected him. You wanted validation, fame, content for your channel. You didn't care who you hurt as long as you looked like a hero exposing villains. The cameraman lowered his device. I'm out, Derek. This isn't what I signed up for. Wait, Derek protested. We can still... It's over, Chuck said quietly. Delete the video about me. Return what you stole. Walk away from this vendetta. Or the next video that goes viral will be about you and your uncle. Derek's shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, it's done. I'll take down everything. Chuck nodded once, then turned to the cameraman. The footage you just recorded? The man held up his camera. Never happened. Far as I'm concerned, I was never here. As Chuck gathered his laptop and prepared to leave, Derek called after him. Was any of it true? Were you really a SEAL? Chuck paused at the door. I never claimed to be. Then what were you? A ghost of a smile crossed Chuck's face. Someone who learned that real strength isn't about how many people you can defeat, but how many you can protect. He glanced at the still open video call where his former teammates watched. Someone who found a second chance to do exactly that. With that, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. 3 months later, Wilkins, MMA was thriving. New students had flocked to the gym after Senator Mercer's surprise retirement announcement and the establishment of the Martinez Foundation for Veteran Support, which had mysteriously selected Chuck's gym as the site for its first community outreach program. Derek Lansing had disappeared from social media, his channel deleted, his crusade abandoned. Rumors suggested he'd taken a job at one of his uncle's companies overseas, somewhere far from the spotlight and the truth he'd unwittingly nearly exposed. As Chuck wrapped up the evening's final class, he noticed Sarah Martinez waiting by the door. She'd been a frequent visitor since that night, helping with the Foundation's programs and slowly rebuilding the friendship that had been broken in the aftermath of Santiago. Good class, she observed as the students filed out. Chuck nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. They're improving. So are you, Sarah said quietly. Michael would be proud of what you've built here. Chuck's expression softened at the mention of his fallen teammate. I hope so. Maria joined them, now fully recovered from her injuries and recently promoted to partner in the business. Bradford called, she informed them. The Foundation's first official fundraiser is next month. He wants you to speak, Chuck grimaced. Public speaking isn't my thing. Too bad, Sarah replied with a smile. The world needs to hear from people who understand that strength doesn't have to be destructive, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is build rather than break. As they turned to leave, Danny hurried in, excitement written across his young face. Coach, did you see the news? They're saying your gym is the best in the state now. The waiting list for new students is crazy. Chuck allowed himself a rare, full smile. Then we'd better make sure we're worth the wait. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Chuck paused for a moment, looking back at the gym with its worn sign and modest exterior. It wasn't much compared to the high-stakes world he'd once inhabited, But it was real. It was honest. It was a place where people grew stronger not to harm, but to protect themselves and others. In the end, that was the lesson Derek Lansing had never understood. True valor wasn't about claims or status or stories told to impress others. It was about choices made when no one was watching, promises kept when breaking them would be easier, and strength used to build rather than destroy. As Chuck locked the gym door, he felt a weight lift, not just the burden of his secrets, but the shadow of his past. He hadn't abandoned who he'd been. He'd transformed it into something new, something better. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. How might your own experiences, good and bad, be transformed into something that helps rather than harms others? What strength do you possess that could be redirected toward building rather than breaking? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more powerful tales like this. See you in the next video. All stories on this channel are works of fiction created solely for entertainment. Any similarity to real persons or events is purely coincidental.